The Hair Transplant Network is the largest hair restoration community created by patients to help you find the best hair loss treatments and surgeons based on results. Here with Win. He's Win 200 on the Hair Restoration Network. I remember you posting back when I first started. And I honestly, it's before you really showed your face or your pictures. I remember I would just see the top. And then when I saw when I saw your pictures, I have to admit that I thought Win 200 was like a euphemism for Winstrol.
Oh yeah, no, which I've never done, by the way. Other stuff, yeah, but not Winstrol. No, right. It's just I think everyone assumes the Win stands for something else is too. Like it's an unusual name, but yeah, that was just me.
Yeah. So I was gonna just kind of show the audience your progression, and for people who don't know, like you've had several surgeries, right? You haven't had just hair transplants. You've had 3 hair transplants,
Correct.
as
Yeah.
far as I'm aware.
Yep.
So I think this is back in 2014. Was this after your first hair transplant or before?
Yeah, this was post first. So I had hair transplants in 2012, 2015, 2018. So 3-year increments between each, all with different surgeons. And actually, they were all good. I wasn't rotating
Mm,
surgeons because I got bad outcomes. It's just I thought each surgeon might be better positioned for each different surgery. But that sort of widow's peak shape in the hairline, I did not have that prior to my first surgery. I
mm,
didn't have super extensive hair loss, but I had kind of the temples going up. And the front forelock had softened a lot and kind of receded up. I actually just saw a picture the other day from before, and I'd forgotten how far back that had gotten. I was showing a lot of
oh,
forehead, but that first surgeon used 1,250 grafts and just put that V line in. And then afterwards is when it got flattened and then bulked up in terms of density on the third transplant.
mm. Yeah. So I mean, I thought your hair looked great, but you got another hair transplant after that. But really, what shocked me was the transformation to your physique, right? A lot of guys on the forum and just anyone in general that's interested in getting hair transplants are also gym goers and interested in maximizing their physiques. And I was looking at your Instagram and I stumbled upon this picture and I was like, you look like in decent shape. I
Yeah.
to the general public, to the majority of people, they'd be happy. They'd be like, yeah, I look good, I'm fit, I'm lean. Um, but it's like it was an incredible transformation, one of the most insane transformations I've ever seen. So again, guy who looks normal, average guy,
Yeah.
lean and everything, and then still the same,
And I'll say
and
for
were you?
context, this was age 31. So this was like spring 2014. I turned 32 later that year. So yeah, early 30s. I started lifting seriously when I started law school, so probably 27, I think. So I was like 4 years of like, 5 to 6 times a week plus being on diet. So this was kind of my without sort of superhuman effort. Sorry. This is where I would get to without like really, really pushing it.
So this was your natural peak physique. Like this was what you would look like naturally without any enhancements.
Yeah, and then without going to sort of like pro bodybuilder level commitment of like I was counting macros but not super closely, like there was probably another mile I could have gone, but this was with like, 80, 90% effort because I think all of us have where our body will kind of naturally go to when we push it and you can get more, but the effort to get that last, like 10, 20% is the difference between a lot of dedication to like putting your whole life on hiatus to only focus on fitness, right? So yeah, this was where I could go naturally.
Yeah, and I think when I was in my 20s, I was the same way. I was like counting my macros religiously, going to the gym like 6, 7 times a week. Uh, like everything revolved around that. And the max I ever got was probably like maybe 10% body fat, where you look
Yeah,
lean, you take your shirt off, you look good, but never like anything super shredded like you are. So this was the transformation. So right here, it's like great. You can see the feathers in your deltoids.
Yeah,
striations.
I was flexing in that picture too. Like the
But
dog with
yeah, but I mean,
the
you're
heavy
probably sub 10% body fat for sure
yeah.
in this
I
picture.
would hang out around probably. I mean, it's like you have to go in the dispersion tank to really measure it. But I was probably at like in that prior picture 7-8%, something like that.
Yeah, right here. I mean, this is insane. Right here, this was probably like 2017, I think, and this was also after
Yeah,
you got jaw surgery too, right? You to enhance your jaw.
yeah. And what that comprises is there are different ways you can augment your chin, your jaw. There are off the shelf implants. But what's really sort of risen in popularity is customizable implants, where you take a CT scan of your bone structure, and then a surgeon and an engineer of the implant company design a silicone. I mean, it doesn't have to be silicone; it could be Medport, it could be
Mm.
titanium. They're all different materials, but it fits over you like a puzzle piece. So it can't fit on anyone else. And so in my case, it covers the entire jawline from up here all the way down through the chin. It is one solid piece. If you see them, they're kind of flexible, but it looks like you're kind of holding a jawbone. It just
Yeah.
slips over it. And then, yeah, that had been
Oh.
placed by the time that picture was taken.
So you did it all kind of like at the same time, sort of, right? Like you started the TRT, the testosterone therapy,
Yeah.
and sort of like your hair transplant journeys was a little bit before that, but I think you also got your last one around that time.
Yeah, this is
Um,
all within. So there was one in 2012, 2015. First round of cycling, I think, was sometime in 2015, right?
2015.
So it was all sort of commingled in the middle.
Oh yeah. I think I saw like there was like this is crazy. This is like men's physique competitor status
And
right here.
that's just the product. So like what I can say, like that's a combination of a couple things, right? Was like one is just cycling, right? Because I put on bulk. And I can't honestly remember for any of these pictures, not for any of them, for a few of them, I'm not sure if I was actually on a cycle at this point.
Mm,
Because the thing I found with cycling, right, is I have a roommate who I lived with during this whole period. And, when you see yourself every day, you just kind of acclimatize the way you look. And he told me once, he said, look, like your physique off cycle now does not resemble how it looked before you'd ever done one. Like it just sort of
mm,
reconfigures your muscle structure in a lot of ways. And if you do
mm.
everything right and you're really optimizing the time you spend on cycle, you won't just go back to your baseline. Like it changed the way I gained muscle. It changed the muscle structure. And it also, when you're on cycle, it's not just about your muscle composition. You can burn fat much more quickly because your metabolism is just ramped up. And it enabled me that level of leanness was something I could maintain off cycle. I think, it took a lot of effort, right? It was heavy lifting. It was calorie counting on my fitness pal. And the thing that worked like a magic bullet for me was 2 sessions of 15-minute HIIT cardio per day. For my
Mm.
metabolism, at least, that's what really like I could not keep fat on when I was doing that. And so that picture is the byproduct of that kind of routine.
And so but naturally you were sort of like a thin guy. Like you seemed like naturally lean, not maybe not obviously not
Yeah.
shredded like that, but an obviously pretty lean guy. You'd probably be like what 13% body fat if you just
Yeah,
naturally.
right. I'm one of those guys where like if I just kind of live my life and eat what I'm going to eat and like just kind of do normal fitness, I have a hard
Yeah.
time keeping weight on. Like as opposed to the guys who like, their body's gravitational pull is just to like put weight or fat on. I had the other problem, right? It was just that's why I, did a cycle the first time is I just couldn't stack on muscle and keep it.
Yeah, I have the same issue. Like if I, one crazy weekend and I'm like, dang, I lost like 8 pounds.
Yeah, right. Like,
um,
and I don't know which is like, I look at some guys, right? Because lower body, I'm 6'1", so like I've got, like lower body is always harder. It's really tough to put bulk on legs. I look at some guys, I feel jealous, like, legs are huge, butts huge, all that stuff. And I just can't get there, but I can stay lean in a way that they really struggle with. So I don't know.
yeah, it's the legs thing is another thing um that's crazy is like some people just naturally don't have like calves, like naturally their calves are
Oh yeah, mine.
just small, their
I
leg.
just don't. Yeah, and it's like, well, it's an attachment point problem and a bulk problem, right? My attachment points, and that's one of the things that you struggle with, right? Like I've got shitty attachment points, right? For calves, for biceps. And there's just one of those things, like there are some limitations, you know. You can work out all you want. You can't move those attachment points. And calves is one of them. Like mine are just so far up. It's like a little toothpick.
Yeah, that's how mine are. So I wanted to ask you about, like, my whole reason for never going that route was because of my hair. Because I was like, you know,
Yeah.
if I ever go this route, I'm gonna have the hairiest back in the world and no hair on my head. Um, but how were you able to maintain, you know, the cycling and, you know, keeping your hair intact?
Yeah, it was a great question. It was something that I worried about a lot too. Because on the one hand, it seems really silly to get a hair transplant and then, you know, shortly thereafter go on a cycle, right? Like you're fighting opposite battles. But I will say, so there's a couple things. And one is that I didn't have severe and extensive hair loss. So I didn't have
Mm.
any therapy, whether it was the transplant, you know, minoxidil, a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, nothing until I was 29. And I had a
Wow.
very reasonable head of hair with sort of recession, and this had gone up, but all of this was still here. So it was a little bit of that, as I had some genetics helping in that it was mild hair loss that didn't seem to be like rapidly accelerating. Because usually, you know, by the end of your 20s, if you're going to lose gobs of hair, like you're going to know.
Yeah.
So it was part of that. But it was also, so I got a hair transplant in June 2012 was the first one. And I lost a lot of hair from shock loss during it. And it came back, but I remember just like handfuls of hair coming off. And I remember reading, you know, like if you went on a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, it's supposed to help with that shock loss process. And I kind of did some of my research later than I should have, and thought, okay, I really need to go on something because otherwise you're going to end up, you know, potentially with the hairline up here and nothing behind it.
Yeah.
So I think it was late 2012. I went on Finasteride, quickly read that, you know, DUTASTERIDE has 90% inhibition rate as opposed to 70%. And then there were, I think there was like 1 or 2 studies that suggested if used in tandem that they could actually bolster one another, that you might get some efficacy beyond DUTASTERIDE alone. So I just said, screw it, I'm doing both of them. So I was doubling up and taking daily 0.5 milligrams DUTASTERIDE and 1.25, I think, Finasteride, which is a ton.
That's
DHT
yeah.
inhibition. So when I was on cycles, I had that in my system. And the thing I should point out to you is, like, saying you're on a cycle, it doesn't mean a lot inherently, right? It's like, what are you doing? What are you putting in your body? And technically speaking, testosterone is not a steroid, it's testosterone. Any other compound gets you into steroids territory, but you probably know, like Winstrol, apparently, I've never done it, terrible for hair. Some of these things, they're direct DHT.
Derivatives, yeah.
Derivatives, right. So you can use all of the DHT inhibitors you want, doesn't matter, because you're just injecting pure DHT derivative into your system.
Yeah.
So the key for me was I was only doing things, it was primarily testosterone, which you're still going to bump up your DHT level from driving your testosterone up. But if you are taking daily DUTASTERIDE and Finasteride, you're still going to be suppressing a huge amount of that DHT. And for context, so I was taking pretty regular blood levels, right? And so without being on a cycle, but being on that joint DUTASTERIDE, Finasteride, the laboratory results for my DHT levels came back unmeasurable. It's like, I think below 5 of whatever the unit is. And they just say, yeah, it's so de minimis. On cycle, I would measure at 15, which is still very low. And now that I'm on topical DUTASTERIDE only, my DHT levels, actually just got one the other day, come in at like 55. So that's all a way of saying I was on so much DHT inhibition that even with, you know, 1,000 grams, 1,000 like 1 gram of testosterone in my system every week, I was still only getting 14 DHT. Wow. So that was kind of the key of selectively doing stuff that still is vulnerable to DHT suppression. So you're not doing Winstrol, you're not doing Tren, you're not doing all of this other stuff that you can't, there's no way around the fact that it's going to screw your hair up if you've got the genes for it.
You know, it's funny you mentioned Tren because that's like the most popular, like anytime I'm sure you get it on your Instagram. Like someone's probably saying, "Man, you've been training hard," or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
you're
like
like,
I think it's one of the ones that's been around, for like 40 years, right? It's one of the classics, so to speak.
yeah, it's just the one that everyone sort of like. I guess it's glamorized, or it's like I don't know, it's hyped up. I've only heard stories and stuff, but they say that it's so your body just changes immensely from the looks of it. I thought for sure like you were taking something that was really like a like Winstrol. I think and again, I have no experience. I've done research because I was considering doing it in my 20s, but apparently it's like it leans you out, it makes you hard, it makes you vascular.
Yeah,
It's like kind of dries you out, so you have like that thick, hard, like dry look, which you have. I think in that other picture, in this picture, you definitely have that dry, hard look that most people, especially like physique competitors and stuff, are looking for. So that's why I'd assume. But it's interesting you say that you can do things that don't necessarily boost your DHT levels that much because you're offsetting it with dutasteride. So it's sort of like an aromatase inhibitor, right? So you take once your
yeah.
testosterone goes up, your estrogen goes up. So you need something to combat that estrogen, and so it's sort of like that. I think I'm understanding it right.
No, that's totally right. And like, look, this all goes without saying, but like, I don't recommend any of it. It's not good for. It's certainly not good for you. If
Yes.
you are going to do it, and I think this is where a lot of guys miss the boat, it is so vital that you get blood work done before, during, and after. And I think I know guys that have gotten into lowercase t trouble, right? Not like massively screwed themselves up, but they had weird outcomes. They had things go wrong on cycle, and if you're not getting blood work, and especially if you don't have a pre-cycle baseline, you don't know what's happening.
Mm,
You're just flying blind, and that goes that's with respect to your hair loss, libido issues. There's all sorts of interplay between your estradiol levels and your testosterone levels and your sex hormone binding globulin levels. There's just so much going on under the hood. So in my case, my doctor was aware, and he would just kind of say, like, okay, well, I
mm.
don't endorse it, but I'll certainly monitor your blood levels to keep you safe. You can do sort of LabCorp by mail. There are options, but like, for God's sake, don't do it without knowing what's going on in your body. And so if you do start to lose a lot of hair, you can pull a blood level and see where your DHT levels are at and see what you're responding to. And that's how I did it, was getting a lot, like, frequent blood levels. I think I get a baseline. I would get one like every 6 weeks or 4 weeks on cycle. So I knew exactly what I was responding to. And I figured out that, the DHT inhibitors for me worked really well. And so I knew that testosterone was safe for me. I used Trenbolone and Anavar, which are all very low anabolic profiles, which means their impact on your hair is going to be minimal. The trade-off is they're not as impactful on your musculature as things like Tren or Winstrol, but I didn't want to get bigger and lose my hair. That wasn't a trade-off
Yeah.
I felt comfortable with. So I just picked my compounds carefully.
But you still got like, and you mentioned you're 6'1", so you're probably what over 200 pounds, I would assume, or I don't
No,
know.
I'm usually so the highest I ever got on cycle was 205. And there was ones, I've done 5 cycles, I believe is the count. Three of them were testosterone only. It was only 2 other cycles I ran other compounds. And on one cycle, I ran NPP, which I think is a DECA. It's like a short ester version of DECA, I
Mm,
think. I didn't know that NPP is gentle on hair if you are not on a dutasteride inhibitor. Apparently, there is some bad interaction
mm.
between DHT inhibition and NPP that actually accelerates your hair loss.
Oh wow.
I can corroborate that because when I was on NPP, I lost a shitload of hair. I mean, like handfuls of hair, to the point where it
Oh
looked
yeah.
thinner afterwards.
Yeah.
Some of it came back, not all of it did. Um, but I gained a ton of size on it. MVP is one of those mass gainers, right? Where like
Yeah.
you get a little more watery, but you get big. And I think that was probably, I mean, it was because I hit 205, and normally I can't hit 200 even on testosterone. It's really tough for me to get to 200. Right now I'm about 190 to 193, and that's kind of like after doing cycles where I'll just cruise at if I'm putting in effort.
That so you kind of subscribe to the philosophy of blasting and cruising.
Yeah, so my understanding of what the term blasting and cruising means is if you never come off, that what you do is
Oh
you're
yeah.
essentially at a TRT dose normally, like 150 a week. And then, when you want to do a cycle, you bump up to 750 or a gram or whatever that is. And then afterwards, you drop back down to your TRT baseline. But essentially, you're never doing post-cycle therapy because
Oh,
you're never
that's right.
coming off. That's not me. I've come off completely to natural hormone levels between cycles. I will say as a cautionary note to anyone who's thinking of it, there's a frequency issue and an age issue with this. So I've done 5 cycles. My first was when I was, I think, 32, 39 now, almost 40. So my last cycle was summer 2021. And I hadn't done one since at least before COVID, so probably like 18 or 19. So my first cycle in a while. So I had a really, really long runway in terms of coming back to natural levels, letting your endocrine system sort itself out. So like the lead up you're supposed to have. The dismount from that cycle was by far exponentially the hardest I've ever had. Testosterone levels crash afterwards, which they usually do because you have to switch everything off, bring it back online. The depression, the libido disruption, the amount of time it took for me to ramp back up to natural testosterone production was so long, so difficult. The depression was exponentially worse than it had been before. And that to me was my signal saying, don't do this again. Because any bodybuilder will tell you there are guys that they do this often enough and then they end up on TRT for the rest of their lives because you switch the engine off and on enough times and then it just won't start. And that's the risk you run, is that you damage or destroy your endocrine system's ability to naturally produce testosterone. And if you're fine being on TRT for the rest of your life, cool. But I think most doctors will tell you that's easier said than done because you've got the, twice weekly or whatever it is, jabs. You might have to be on, aromatase inhibitor. You're just chemically dependent on it for the rest of your life. And I didn't really want to be unless I had to. So after this last one, my natural T production got back up. I have pretty healthy levels. I'm usually at like 750, which is not bad for being almost 40. But it was clearly like, don't do this again. Like you got lucky on this one, but it was a rough restart.